There is a sound beneath the world, something older than language, older than memory, older than the first fire that a frightened hand cupped against the dark. It is not a heartbeat, though it pulses. It is not a breath, though it stirs the roots of mountains and the silt at the bottom of ancient seas. It sleeps, that is the important thing to understand. It sleeps, and when it dreams, the world above carries on in the fragile illusion of normalcy. Kingdoms rise, harvests come and go, children are born beneath ordinary skies. But when it stirs, even slightly, even in the deepest fold of its slumber, the fabric of reality shivers, and sometimes it wakes. The wind moves through Boletaria like a whispered confession. It carries with it the scent of cold stone and iron, the faintest trace of wood smoke from fires long since abandoned, and something else, something sweet and terrible, like flowers blooming in a graveyard. The fog that has swallowed this kingdom does not behave as fog should. It does not lift with the morning sun. It does not thin at the edges. It moves with purpose, rolling inward from the northern mountains, creeping through valleys and swallowing villages one by one, as if the land itself were being slowly devoured by a great and patient mouth. This is where our story begins, not with heroes or villains, not with the clash of swords, but with the quiet encroachment of something that was never meant to be disturbed. It begins, as all the deepest stories do, with the earth remembering something it had tried very hard to forget. Long before the fog, long before the demons and the dying, there was only the world as it was meant to be. The land was whole, the sky was clear, and beneath the surface of things, in the dark places where roots tangle and rivers lose themselves, the Old One slumbered. It had slumbered since before the first stone was laid, since before the first word was spoken, since before the concept of before had any meaning at all. It was ancient in a way that made the very idea of age irrelevant. It simply was, and its being was the foundation upon which all other beings rested. But slumber is not oblivion. Even in the deepest sleep there are dreams, and the Old One's dreams seeped upward through the crust of the earth like groundwater, through limestone, slowly, imperceptibly, saturating the world above with a substance that had no name. It was not magic, not exactly. It was something more fundamental than that. It was the raw material of souls, the primordial essence from which consciousness itself is woven. And when the first humans began to notice it, when they felt it humming in their blood, singing in their bones, they gave it a name. They called it the soul arts. The discovery changed everything. Imagine a world lit only by firelight, and then suddenly the sun appears. That is what the soul arts meant to the early people of this land. They could reach into the invisible architecture of existence and reshape it. They could heal wounds by touching the soul fabric that lies beneath the skin. They could strengthen their bodies by weaving soul stuff into their muscles and sinews. They could even, with great effort and greater sacrifice, bend the very forces of life and death. It was intoxicating. It was transformative. It was, in the truest sense of the word, awesome. And it was a gift. That is what they believed. And in a way they were right. The Old One dreamed, and in its dreaming it gave. But the nature of such gifts is never simple. A river that nourishes can also flood. A fire that warms can also consume. The soul arts came from a source that was not benevolent, not malevolent, simply vast beyond comprehension, like an ocean that feeds the fish and drowns the sailor with equal indifference. For a time, this did not matter. The soul arts flourished, and with them, the civilizations that learned to wield them. Kingdoms grew, knowledge deepened, the world expanded in ways both physical and metaphysical, as scholars learned to see the hidden threads that connect all living things, and warriors learned to channel the raw force of souls into devastating power. Great libraries were built to house the accumulated wisdom of generations. Cathedrals of learning rose from the plains, their spires catching the light of the sun and scattering it into prismatic rainbows. It was, by every measure that mattered, a golden age. Boletaria was the jewel of this age. It sat at the heart of the known world, a kingdom of white towers and green valleys, of fertile fields and crystal rivers that wound through meadows like threads of silver. Its people were proud and strong, blessed with a lineage of wise rulers who understood the soul arts, not as a tool for domination, but as a sacred trust. The kingdom's architecture reflected this philosophy. Soaring cathedrals that seemed to reach toward heaven, great libraries where scholars pored over ancient texts by candlelight, and massive fortifications that spoke not of aggression, but of a deep desire to protect what had been built. The markets of Boletaria were legendary. Merchants from distant lands came to trade in spices and silks, in rare metals and stranger substances drawn from the deep places of the earth. The air was thick with the sound of haggling voices and the scent of unfamiliar foods. Children ran through the cobblestone streets, their laughter echoing off the ancient walls. In the evenings, musicians played in the public squares, while the elderly sat on stone benches and watched the world go by with the quiet satisfaction of those who have lived long enough to appreciate the beauty of ordinary moments. King Allant XII ruled Boletaria during its twilight years. He was not a tyrant, not at first. He was, by all accounts, a thoughtful and conscientious monarch, a man who genuinely loved his people and wished to see them prosper. He studied the old histories, learned the lessons of his predecessors, and governed with a steady hand and an open heart. His court was renowned for its culture and learning. His soldiers were respected for their discipline and honour. His people were content, but contentment, for a man of ambition and intelligence, can become a kind of prison. Allant began to see the limitations of his kingdom, the boundaries of what the soul arts could achieve within the framework of human understanding. He wanted more, not out of greed, or at least not only out of greed, but out of a genuine desire to push beyond the walls of the known, to discover what lay in the spaces between the visible and the invisible. He began to study the deeper mysteries, the forbidden texts that his predecessors had locked away, the dangerous experiments that wiser men had abandoned. He found something. In the deepest vaults beneath his castle, in chambers that had been sealed since before the kingdom's founding, Allant discovered records of the Old One, not the sanitized legends that the people knew, not the children's tales of a sleeping giant, but the truth, the raw, unvarnished, terrifying truth. The Old One was not a myth, it was not a metaphor. It was a real and present force, sleeping beneath the world, and the soul arts that had built Boletaria were merely the faintest exhalation of its dreaming mind. Most men would have recoiled from this knowledge. Most men would have sealed the vaults again and tried to forget what they had learned. But Allant was not most men. He saw in the Old One not a threat, but an opportunity. If the soul arts, born from the mere dreams of this ancient being, could build a kingdom, then what could be achieved by drawing on the Old One's full power? What transformations were possible if one could tap directly into the source? The king made a choice that would echo through the ages. He reached out to the Old One. He called to it across the void that separates the sleeping from the waking, and the Old One heard him. It stirred. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Enough to send a tendril of awareness upward through the earth. Enough to touch the mind of a king and whisper promises of power beyond imagining. The pact was sealed in silence and darkness. Allant offered the Old One what it craved, souls, the living essence of conscious beings, and in return, the Old One granted him access to power that no human had ever wielded. It was not a fair exchange. It was never meant to be. The Old One does not deal in fairness. It deals in hunger. But Allant, blinded by his ambition and intoxicated by the first taste of demon souls, did not see the trap closing around him. Or perhaps he saw it and simply did not care. The change in Boletaria was immediate and devastating. The king who had once governed with wisdom and compassion became something else entirely. His court, once renowned for its learning, became a place of dark experiments and terrible sacrifices. The people began to suffer. Villages that had once been prosperous were drained of life, their inhabitants used as fuel for Allant's increasingly desperate attempts to harness the power he had bargained for. The kingdom that had been the jewel of the known world began to tarnish to rot from the inside out, like a beautiful fruit concealing a nest of worms. And then the fog came. It began at the edges, creeping in from the margins of the kingdom like a living thing, patient and inexorable. The first villages to be swallowed simply went silent. No messengers came, no smoke rose from their hearths. When soldiers were sent to investigate, they did not return either. The fog consumed everything: sound, light, hope. It was not merely a physical phenomenon, but a metaphysical one, a barrier between the world as it was and the world as the Old One wished it to be. Within the fog, demons were born. They emerged from the corrupted souls of the kingdom's inhabitants, twisted and remade by the Old One's influence into creatures of nightmare. Some were enormous, towering monstrosities that shook the earth with every step. Others were small and swift, skittering through the shadows like insects. All of them hungered for the one thing the Old One craved above all else: more souls. They spread outward from Boletaria like a plague, consuming everything in their path, growing stronger with every soul they devoured. The neighbouring kingdoms watched in horror as the fog advanced. Armies were assembled, alliances were forged, and desperate attempts were made to contain the spreading darkness. But the fog could not be fought with swords or sorcery. It simply absorbed all opposition, swallowing soldiers and mages alike, adding their strength to its own. The world began to realise, with dawning terror, that this was not an enemy that could be defeated by force. This was something else entirely. This was an apocalypse. It was in this darkest hour that the ancient guardians of the world remembered their purpose. The Monumentals, beings older than human civilization, older perhaps than the Old One's first awakening, had watched over the world since time beyond reckoning. They were not gods, though some had worshipped them as such. They were something more modest and more profound: sentinels, watchers, keepers of the balance between the waking world and the dreaming darkness beneath it. The Monumentals had stopped the Old One once before, in an age so distant that even the stones had forgotten it. They had lulled it back to sleep, weaving a great working of soulcraft that pressed the ancient being down into the depths and sealed it there. But the seal was not eternal. Nothing is. And when Allant tore it open with his reckless bargains, the Monumentals knew that the world would need help. They could not intervene directly. Their power was spent, their forms diminished by the long ages of vigil. But they could create a place between places, a sanctuary where the living could gather and prepare to face the darkness. They called it the Nexus. The Nexus exists in a space that is not quite a space, a location that is not quite a location. It is a hub, a crossroads, a way station between worlds. Imagine a great stone structure, ancient and impossibly vast. Suspended in an infinite void of soft dark blue, pillars rise like the trunks of petrified trees, supporting arches that disappear into the darkness above. Candles burn with flames that cast no shadows, their light warm and golden, but somehow melancholy, like the last rays of a sunset that never quite ends. The air is still and cool, carrying the faintest scent of incense and old stone. The Nexus is a place of refuge, but it is not a place of peace. It is filled with the souls of those who have been drawn to this Nexus point. Travellers, warriors, scholars, madmen, all of them trapped between the world they knew and the darkness that has consumed it. They gather around the central stone, a massive obelisk inscribed with runes that pulse with faint light, and they wait. Some wait for rescue that will never come. Some wait for an opportunity to fight back. Some simply wait because they have nowhere else to go. Among the lost souls who linger in the Nexus, there are those who have found ways to serve. A blacksmith with soot-stained hands and haunted eyes tends a forge that burns without fuel, shaping weapons and armour from the strange metals that the fog carries with it. He works in silence, his hammer ringing out against the anvil, in a rhythm that sounds almost like a heartbeat, steady and reassuring in the stillness of the void. His creations are imperfect, marked by the desperation of their making, but they are strong. They will hold. A merchant sits near the base of the great stone, surrounded by bundles and boxes that seem far too numerous for one person to have carried. He is a nervous man, quick to smile and quicker to flinch, and he speaks of a woman he left behind, a wife perhaps, or a daughter, whom he hopes to find when the fog lifts. His goods are practical, the sort of things a person needs to survive in hostile territory, and he offers them with the desperate generosity of someone who has nothing left to give except the contents of his packs. There is an executioner too, though he seems out of place among the refugees. He is a large man, broad-shouldered and solemn, and he carries his axe not as a weapon, but as a tool of office, the way a priest might carry a censer. He speaks of duty and honour in a voice that is surprisingly gentle, and he watches the other souls with the careful attention of someone who has seen the worst that people can do and has not yet decided whether the worst is inevitable. At the heart of the Nexus, in a chamber that seems to exist outside of time itself, sits the maiden in black. She is a woman of indeterminate age, her eyes covered by a cloth, her hands folded in her lap, with the patience of someone who has been waiting since before the world was made. She is blind, but she sees more than any sighted person could. She perceives the flow of souls, the great river of consciousness that runs through all living things, and she can shape it, redirect it, channel it into forms that serve the purposes of those who seek her aid. She is ancient, older than the Nexus itself, older perhaps than the Monumentals who built it. Some say she was once a demon of immense power, a being who chose to turn away from the Old One's hunger and instead devote herself to the service of the living. Others say she is the Old One's counterpart, its opposite and its equal, a force of gentle dissolution that balances the ancient being's consuming fire. The truth, as with all things concerning the Maiden in Black, is hidden behind her quiet smile and her patient hands. When the slayer of demons brings souls to her, she takes them in her slender fingers and holds them up to the light that is not light, the darkness that is not darkness, the space where her eyes would be if the cloth were removed. She murmurs words in a language that predates all known tongues, syllables that sound like water flowing over smooth stones, and the souls change. They become denser, richer, more potent. She returns them to the slayer, and in that moment of transfer, their fingers brush, and the slayer feels the weight of eternity in her touch. The Nexus connects to the outside world through 5 great Archstones, each one a portal to a different region that has been touched by the fog and the demons it carries. These are not random connections, but deliberate pathways, chosen by the Monumentals for their strategic significance. Each Archstone leads to a place where the demon corruption runs deep, where a powerful demon lords over a twisted parody of what the land once was. To seal the Old One back into slumber, all 5 must be cleansed. The Archstones must be activated, the demon lords must be defeated, and the flow of souls that feeds the Old One must be interrupted. The first Archstone leads to the heart of Boletaria itself. This is where the corruption began, and it is where the deepest scars can be found. The kingdom that was once a jewel is now a charnel house, its white towers stained with soot and blood, its green valleys littered with the broken bodies of those who could not escape the fog. The streets are haunted by the remnants of what was once a proud and noble people, twisted into hollow-eyed phantoms that wander without purpose, driven only by the faintest echo of the lives they once led. The great gate of the palace hangs open on broken hinges, its iron reinforcements bent and rusted. Beyond it, the courtyard where children once played is choked with rubble and the skeletal remains of trees. The throne room, where Allant once dispensed justice beneath a canopy of gold thread, is a ruin of shattered columns and toppled statues. The air smells of ash and something older, something that has no name, but that the nose recognises as the scent of endings. At the centre of this devastation sits the false king. He wears Allant's face and Allant's armour, speaks with Allant's voice, and carries Allant's sword, a blade of terrible beauty, its edge wreathed in a nimbus of pale light that speaks of the demon souls that forged it. But he is not Allant, he is a demon, a creature of the Old One's making, designed to rule Boletaria in the king's name, while the real Allant descended deeper into his dark bargain. The false king is beautiful and terrible, a perfect imitation of royalty corrupted by the absolute power that flows through demon veins. He sits on a throne of twisted metal and broken stone, dispensing a mockery of justice over a kingdom of ghosts. He speaks of the end of the world with a calm that borders on tenderness. He speaks of the mercy of oblivion, of the kindness of the fog that swallows suffering along with everything else. His words are not the ravings of a madman, but the measured pronouncements of a philosopher who has come to a conclusion that the living cannot accept. The world is a cycle of pain, he says. The fog is the cure. The second Archstone opens onto the Stonefang tunnels, a vast network of mines and caverns that once supplied Boletaria with the metals and minerals it needed to build its great civilization. Now the tunnels are a labyrinth of fire and iron, where the very stone has been corrupted by the Old One's influence into something hungry and alive. The miners who once worked these depths have been transformed into creatures of flame and slag, their humanity burned away by the relentless heat that rises from the earth's core. The deeper one goes, the hotter it becomes, until the stone itself glows like embers in a dying fire. The tunnels twist and turn, branching into passages that lead nowhere and chambers that echo with the sound of dripping water and distant inhuman laughter. The walls are carved with the marks of countless picks and chisels, the evidence of generations of honest labour now rendered meaningless by the corruption that has consumed it. Here and there, abandoned tools lie in the dust, a pickaxe with a broken handle, a helmet dented by a falling rock, a lunch pail still containing the fossilised remains of a meal that was never finished. The dragon that dwells in the deepest tunnels is a creature of pure elemental fury, a living flame that has consumed so many souls that it has become something more than a beast and less than a god. Its scales are the colour of cooling lava, black shot through with veins of orange and red, and its breath is a torrent of white-hot fire that can melt stone and turn iron to liquid. It does not guard treasure in the way that the old stories describe. It guards nothing. It simply is, a manifestation of the earth's anger at what has been done to it, a fire that burns because burning is what fire does. The third Archstone leads to the Tower of Latria, and this is perhaps the most tragic of all the five lands. Latria was once a centre of learning, a place where scholars gathered to study the mysteries of the soul arts and the nature of consciousness itself. It was a beautiful city, of soaring spires and graceful bridges, of libraries and laboratories, of art and philosophy, and the quiet joy of intellectual discovery. But the scholars' curiosity led them to the same dark knowledge that had consumed Allant, and their experiments produced results far worse than anything they had imagined. The Tower of Latria is now a prison, not a metaphorical prison, but a literal one, a vast and terrible structure of iron and stone where countless souls are held captive, tortured, and used as subjects in experiments that would make even the most hardened scholar weep. The guards are not human, they are golems, mindless constructs of metal and magic that follow their programming with mechanical precision. The prisoners are kept in iron cells, suspended over depths that seem to have no bottom, their cries echoing through the tower's endless corridors like the sound of wind through hollow reeds. The bells toll in Latria. They toll without pattern, without rhythm, without reason. They are the voice of a place that has forgotten how to be silent, a tower that rings with the anguish of its inhabitants and the madness of its master. The sound is beautiful. That is the worst part. The sound is genuinely beautiful, a deep and resonant tone that fills the air like the music of a cathedral organ, and it is made entirely of suffering. At the heart of the tower sits the old monk, a figure draped in robes of dark crimson, his face hidden behind a mask of golden metal. He was once the tower's greatest scholar, a man who sought to understand the deepest secrets of the soul arts. But his research led him to the same abyss that consumed Allant, and he fell. Now he sits in his chamber of horrors, surrounded by the fruits of his terrible experiments, waiting for the next subject to be brought before him. His power is immense, drawn from the suffering of countless prisoners, and his mind is as sharp and cold as a blade of ice. He conjures a phantom, a creature of pure soul energy, to fight in his stead, and watches from behind his mask as the battle unfolds, with the detached curiosity of a scholar observing an interesting specimen. The fourth Archstone opens onto the Shrine of Storms, a desolate and windswept place that sits atop a cliff, overlooking an endless, churning sea. This was once a sacred site, a place where the dead were honoured and their souls were guided to whatever waited beyond the veil of mortality. The shrine's priests were keepers of the boundary between life and death, solemn men and women who understood that the passage from one state to the other was not to be feared, but to be respected and facilitated with dignity. The architecture of the shrine is ancient, predating even Boletaria's oldest structures. Great stone pillars, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, line the path to the inner sanctum. The walls are carved with images of the dead and the living, intertwined in patterns that suggest the two states are not opposites but partners in an endless dance. The floor is littered with offerings, coins, flowers, small carved figures, the tokens of grief that the living leave for those they have lost. But the fog and the demons corrupted even this sacred place. The dead rose, not as the gentle spirits that the priests had once guided, but as hungry, violent revenants, driven by the Old One's insatiable appetite for souls. The priests themselves were consumed, their bodies and minds twisted into instruments of the very evil they had once opposed. The Shrine of Storms became a place of perpetual tempest, where lightning split the sky and the wind howled with the voices of the restless dead. In the deepest chamber of the shrine, beneath the storm-swept cliffs, the adjudicator waits. It is a creature of immense size, a bloated, worm-like thing that dwells in the darkness below, consuming the souls of the dead that fall through the cracks in the floor above. It does not think, it does not reason, it simply eats, an appetite given form, a hunger made manifest. And above it, perched on the narrow ledges of the shrine's crumbling walls, a storm king rules over a kingdom of crows and lightning, commanding the very elements to do his bidding. The fifth and final archstone leads to the Valley of Defilement, and it is the darkest place in all the corrupted lands. This was never a beautiful place, even before the fog. It was where Boletaria cast its unwanted, the sick, the poor, the criminal, the different. It was a dumping ground, a place of exile, a valley where society's refuse was left to rot. The people who lived here were already broken, already forgotten, already stripped of hope and dignity. The fog simply finished what society had started. The Valley of Defilement is a swamp of black water and broken dreams, a place where the very ground is soft and treacherous, threatening to swallow anyone who ventures too far from the narrow paths of solid earth. The air is thick with the stench of decay, and the water is poisoned with the waste of centuries of neglect. The inhabitants have been transformed into creatures that reflect the place that spawned them, twisted, bloated, mindless things that wander through the muck without purpose or hope. The leeches in the valley are the size of a man's forearm. They cling to every surface, walls, ceilings, the bodies of the wretched beings that wade through the mire. The sound of their feeding is a wet, rhythmic thing that fills the silence between the distant cries of the afflicted. The light here is grey and flat, filtered through layers of fog and the canopy of dead trees that arch overhead like the ribs of some great beast. There is no beauty in this place. There is only endurance, only the stubborn refusal of life to end, even when ending would be a mercy. At the heart of this wretched place sits the maiden Latria, and her story is perhaps the most heartbreaking of all. She was a saint, a woman of pure heart and unwavering faith, who came to the Valley of Defilement not to conquer it but to help its people. She believed that no soul was beyond redemption, that even the most wretched being deserved compassion and care. She brought food and medicine, and most importantly, hope to the valley's forgotten people. But the valley was too much for her. Not because it was physically dangerous, though it was, but because the depth of suffering she witnessed broke something inside her. She saw the full extent of humanity's capacity for cruelty, the way that supposedly decent people could cast their fellow beings into a living hell and then forget they existed. She saw the demons that had been created from the valley's inhabitants, and she understood that these monsters were not aberrations, but the natural result of a society that valued some lives above others. Astria did not fall to darkness. She chose it. She took the demon soul that was offered to her and embraced it, not out of hunger for power, but out of despair. If the world was this cruel, she reasoned, then perhaps the demon's way was more honest. At least they did not pretend to be anything other than what they were. She became the valley's protector, a dark saint who used her immense power to shield the wretched beings that lived there from the outside world's judgment. Her bodyguard, Garl Vinland, stands beside her with his hammer and his shield, a knight of unshakable loyalty who followed his mistress into the darkness without hesitation. He does not question her choice. He does not judge her. He simply stands, a wall of faith and steel, between the woman he serves and a world that does not deserve her. When the Slayer comes, Garl Vinland does not beg for mercy. He asks only one thing: do not touch her. Leave her in peace. She has suffered enough. These 5 lands, connected by the Archstones, form the geography of the demon apocalypse. Each one is a piece of a larger puzzle, a fragment of the truth about what went wrong and how it might be set right. And the only one who can piece this puzzle together is the figure who stands at the centre of the Nexus, the one who has crossed the fog not to conquer but to understand, not to rule but to heal, the Slayer of Demons. That is the title given to the one who answers the Nexus's call. Not a hero, not in the traditional sense. Heroes are born of legend and shaped by narrative. The Slayer is something more modest and more profound. A single soul, drawn from the outside world, who chose to walk into the fog when everyone else was running away. The reasons for this choice are as varied as the souls who make it. Some come seeking glory. Some come seeking redemption. Some come simply because they cannot bear to do nothing while the world burns. Whatever their reason, the Slayer arrives in the Nexus with nothing but the clothes on their back and the fire in their soul. They are greeted by the Monumental's hollow voice echoing through the stone, by the murmuring of the other trapped souls, and by the maiden in Black's gentle, knowing smile. They are given a simple task: cleanse the 5 Archstones, defeat the demon lords, and find a way to seal the Old One back into its eternal sleep. The journey is not a straight line. It is a spiral, a descent into the depths of corruption and the heights of human endurance. Each land that the Slayer visits teaches them something about the nature of the threat they face, and each demon lord that they defeat brings them one step closer to understanding the terrible truth at the heart of this catastrophe. The demons are not simply monsters to be killed. They are reflections of the people they once were, amplified and distorted by the Old One's hunger into something that is both more and less than human. In Boletaria, the Slayer learns about the corruption of power. The false king sits on his stolen throne, dispensing a grotesque parody of kingship, and the Slayer must cut through the illusions and the lies to reach the truth beneath. The truth is that there is no king in Boletaria anymore. There is only a demon wearing a crown, and the crown itself is heavier than any mortal could bear. In the Tower of Latria, the Slayer learns about the corruption of knowledge. The old monk sits in his prison of scholarship, surrounded by the evidence of his crimes, and the Slayer must navigate the tower's horrors to reach him. The truth is that knowledge without wisdom is a weapon that destroys the wielder first, and that some doors are closed for very good reasons. In the Valley of Defilement, the Slayer learns about the corruption of compassion. Astria sits in her swamp of despair, holding her dark saint's vigil, and the Slayer must decide whether to fight her or to understand her. The truth is that compassion without strength is a candle in a hurricane, and that even the purest heart can be broken by the weight of the world's suffering. In the Shrine of Storms, the Slayer learns about the corruption of death itself. The restless dead howl through the storm, and the slayer must find the source of their torment and silence it. The truth is that death is not the enemy. It is the natural conclusion of a life well lived, and those who seek to deny it or to cheat it create horrors far worse than the thing they feared. In the Stonefang tunnels, the slayer learns about the corruption of industry and ambition. The fires burn deep, and the slayer must descend into the earth's heat to find the demon that stokes them. The truth is that the earth's bounty is not infinite, and that those who take without giving back will find themselves consumed by the very fire they ignited. With each victory, the slayer grows stronger. The souls of the defeated demons flow into the slayer's own soul through the maiden in black's patient ministrations, and with each infusion of power, the slayer becomes more capable of facing the greater challenges that lie ahead. But power, as the story has shown again and again, is a double-edged sword. The same force that can save can also corrupt. The same strength that can protect can also destroy. The slayer walks a razor's edge, balanced between the light of human compassion and the darkness of demon hunger. The maiden in black watches over this transformation with her blind eyes and her knowing hands. She is the slayer's constant companion, the one who shapes the raw power of demon souls into forms that the slayer can use. She asks nothing in return. She makes no demands. She simply sits in her chamber, patient and eternal, and waits for the slayer to bring her the souls that will fuel the next stage of their journey. There is something deeply maternal about her presence, something that speaks of unconditional love and infinite patience. She is the antithesis of the Old One. Where it consumes, she gives. Where it hungers, she satisfies. Where it destroys, she restores. But even the maiden in black has her secrets. Her origins are shrouded in mystery, her true nature hidden behind layers of legend and speculation. Some say she is the Old One's sister, born from the same primordial darkness but choosing a different path. Others say she is the last of the Monumentals, the final guardian of a world that has forgotten how to be guarded. Whatever the truth, her presence in the Nexus is both a comfort and a warning. She is a reminder that power can be wielded with gentleness, but also that even gentleness has its limits. As the slayer progresses through the 5 lands, a pattern begins to emerge. The demon lords are not random creatures of destruction. They are nodes in a network, points of connection between the Old One and the waking world. Each one serves as a conduit, channeling the flow of souls downward into the earth where the Old One sleeps. To defeat them is not simply to kill a monster, but to cut a thread in the great web that sustains the ancient being's power. And when all 5 threads are cut, the Old One will be vulnerable. It will stir from its partial slumber and face the one who has dismantled its carefully constructed feeding apparatus. This is the moment that the Monumentals have been waiting for. This is the reason they created the Nexus and guided the Slayer to its threshold. When the 5 demon lords are defeated and the Archstones are cleansed, a path opens, a passage that leads not outward to another land but downward, into the very heart of the darkness, to the place where the Old One rests. But first there is the matter of the real king. Deep in the lowest reaches of the Nexus, in a chamber that none of the other refugees know exists, the true King Allant waits. He is not the regal figure that the false king imitates. He is a ruin, a shriveled, broken thing, curled upon himself like a child that has been beaten too many times to stand. The demon souls he consumed have hollowed him out, leaving nothing but a shell of what was once a great man. He speaks, but his words are the ramblings of someone who has seen too much and understood too late. The world is a wasteland, he says. Everything is a lie. The only truth is despair. He is wrong. Or perhaps he is right. It depends on the Slayer, on the choices they have made, and the truths they have gathered along the way. The real King Allant is a mirror, a reflection of what happens when power is pursued without purpose, when ambition outpaces wisdom, when a good man makes a bargain with something that does not understand goodness. He is the lesson at the heart of Boletaria's tragedy, the final exam in a course that no one wanted to take. After the king is dealt with, the Slayer descends, down through layers of stone and shadow, through passages that grow older and more primal with every step, through chambers that were ancient when the first mountain was young. The air grows thick with the presence of the Old One, a pressure that is not physical but spiritual, a weight that presses on the soul like a hand pressing on a wound. The walls pulse with a faint, sickly light, and the stone itself seems to breathe, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of the Old One's slumber. At the bottom of the descent, in a chamber so vast that its walls cannot be seen, and so deep that the sky is nothing but a memory, the Slayer finds the Old One. It is not what they expected. It is not a monster, not a beast, not even a being in any recognizable sense of the word. It is a presence, a vast and formless darkness that fills the chamber like water fills a bowl. It is the absence of light, the absence of meaning, the absence of everything that makes existence bearable. And it is awake, not fully, not in the way that a person is awake, but enough to be aware of the Slayer's presence, enough to feel the closing of the trap, enough to be afraid. For the Old One is afraid. This is the secret that no one tells, the truth that lies beneath all the legends and all the horrors. The Old One does not want to consume. It does not want to destroy. It does not want anything at all, in the way that a river does not want to flow or a fire does not want to burn. It simply is, and its being is a hunger that it cannot control. It sleeps because sleeping is the only way to contain the hunger, and it wakes because the hunger, eventually, always becomes too great to contain. It is a prisoner of its own nature, trapped in an endless cycle of slumber and awakening, dreaming and devouring, and it has been trapped since before the world began. The maiden in black stands beside the Slayer in that final chamber. Her cloth-covered eyes are turned toward the vast darkness, and her hands are raised, not in challenge, but in greeting. She knows this place. She has been here before, in cycles that the living cannot remember. She speaks to the Old One in the language that is not a language, the tongue of souls and silence, and the Old One listens. It has always listened to her. She is the only thing it has ever truly heard. The Slayer stands before the Old One and faces a choice. This is the moment that everything has been building toward, the fulcrum on which the fate of the world balances. There are two paths, and both of them lead to an ending of sorts. But the nature of that ending depends on the Slayer's understanding of what they have witnessed, what they have learned, and what they believe about the nature of power, sacrifice, and the relationship between the waking world and the dreaming darkness. The first path is the path of sacrifice. The Slayer can offer themselves to the Old One, not as food, but as a guardian. They can take the maiden in black's place, becoming a new Monumental, a new sentinel who will watch over the Old One's slumber and ensure that it does not wake again. This is not a death exactly, but it is a kind of ending. The Slayer will cease to be a person and become something else, a pillar of consciousness, a living seal that holds the darkness in place. It is an act of supreme selflessness, a sacrifice that will save the world but destroy the one who makes it. The maiden in black pleads for this path. She has seen too many cycles of awakening and slumber, too many worlds consumed and rebuilt and consumed again. She wants it to end. She wants the Old One to sleep forever, and she is willing to do whatever it takes to make that happen. Her voice is gentle, her hands are steady, and her conviction is absolute. This is the right thing to do, she says. This is the only thing to do. But there is another path. The Slayer can refuse the sacrifice. They can choose to leave the Old One as it is, dormant but not dead, sleeping but not sealed. They can take the power that the Old One offers, the demon souls, the soul arts, the raw force of the ancient being's dreaming mind, and use it to reshape the world. This is not selfishness, or at least not only selfishness. It is a belief that the cycle does not have to end, that the Old One's power can be used for good, that the world can be rebuilt stronger and better than before. The choice is not simple. It is not a matter of good versus evil, light versus darkness, right versus wrong. It is a matter of philosophy, of what one believes about the nature of existence and the possibility of change. Is it better to end the cycle, even at the cost of one's own identity? Or is it better to continue the cycle, using its power to create something new and beautiful from the ashes of what was lost? The Slayer makes their choice, and the world responds. If the Slayer chooses sacrifice, the Maiden in Black lulls the Old One to sleep one final time. The Slayer's soul merges with the ancient being's consciousness, becoming a wall between the Old One and the waking world. The fog lifts, the demons dissolve, the five lands begin the long, slow process of healing, and in the deepest chamber beneath the Nexus, a new Monumental stands vigil, patient and eternal, watching over a sleep that will never be disturbed again. If the Slayer chooses power, the Old One offers its hand, and the Slayer takes it. The Maiden in Black is left behind, her purpose unfulfilled, her patience unrewarded. The Slayer emerges from the depths carrying the full force of the soul arts, a being of immense power and terrible responsibility. The fog remains, but it no longer advances. The demons remain, but they are held in check by the Slayer's will. The world continues, imperfect and dangerous, but alive. And somewhere beneath it all, the Old One dreams on. Its hunger contained but not conquered, its slumber disturbed but not ended. Both endings are true. Both are necessary. Both contain within them the seeds of future stories, future cycles, future awakenings. This is the nature of the world that the Old One's dreaming has created, a place where every ending is a beginning, where every death is a doorway, and where the choice between sacrifice and power is never made once, but made again and again and again, in every heart, in every age, in every breath. There is something deeply human in this, something that speaks to the quiet anxieties that live in the spaces between our waking thoughts. We all carry within us the knowledge that we are temporary, that the world we build will eventually crumble, that the love we give will someday be forgotten. And yet we build, we love, we carry on. Not because we believe that our efforts will endure forever, but because the act of building, the act of loving, the act of carrying on is itself the meaning. The cycle is not a punishment, it is a gift. Each iteration, each awakening and slumber, each birth and death is an opportunity to try again, to do better, to reach a little further toward the light. The Old One sleeps beneath the world, and its dreams become the raw material of existence. The Monumentals watch, and their vigilance keeps the balance. The Maiden in Black sits in her chamber, patient and eternal, and her gentle hands shape the chaos into something that the living can use. And somewhere, in a place that is not quite a place, a soul stands at the threshold of the fog, deciding whether to walk forward or to turn back. The fog curls through the empty streets of Boletaria, soft and grey and patient. The candles in the Nexus burn with their eternal shadowless light. The Maiden in Black sits in her chamber, her hands folded, her blind eyes turned toward a future that she can feel but not see. And somewhere, in the deep places where the earth remembers its oldest dreams, the Old One stirs and sleeps and stirs again. The wind moves through the kingdom like a whispered prayer. It carries with it the scent of cold stone and distant rain, the faintest echo of voices that were silenced long ago, and something else, something warm and fragile, like the first light of morning after a long and terrible night. The world endures, the cycle continues, and in the spaces between the waking and the sleeping, between the light and the dark, between the soul and the silence, there is peace. There is always peace, if you know where to look. Close your eyes now. Let the fog settle around you, not as a threat but as a blanket, soft and cool and infinitely gentle. Let the candles of the Nexus warm the darkness behind your eyelids. Let the Maiden in Black's patient hands guide you down, 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 into the place where dreams are made, where the soul rests, where the ancient heartbeat of the world slows to a rhythm older than memory. You have listened to the story of a sleeping god and the world it dreamed into being. You have heard of kings who fell, and saints who chose darkness, and a single soul who walked into the fog, because someone had to. These are not just stories. They are echoes of something true, something that lives in the architecture of all our lives. The knowledge that we are all, in our own way, walking into the fog, choosing between sacrifice and power, between ending and continuing, between sleep and waking. And there is no wrong choice. There never was. The Old One sleeps, and so now, may you, good night.